We sure have a lot of catching up to do. Nate Stanley, Anthony Barr news, Ben Leber saying stuff on the radio. Let's get into it. It's the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. And today's going to be a little bit of a news roundup. We've got Nate Stanley was released. I'll talk about all the ins and outs of that. What's going on with the rookie contracts? Is there more stuff about Kirk Cousins and Mike Zimmer feuding? We'll get into all of that stuff. Touch on kind of everything that happened over the week. Let's start with Nate Stanley, the actual, I guess, most recent transaction the Vikings have made. Everything else is speculation. So on Tuesday, the Vikings released Nate Stanley, freeing up a spot on their 90-man roster. So a whole bunch of questions. A, why him? What's happened to Nate Stanley? Why now? July 18th? What a weird day or 19th? Like, what a weird day to release someone. What's going on? Does it have anything to do with a potential signing and stuff? Which, hold your horses. We'll get to that. But first, Nate Stanley has had terrible availability the entire time he's been here. He's missed a whole lot of practices, not just this year, too. The last couple of years as well, he's missed time. And so that's something. I believe he had an injury his rookie year. He missed some time along with all the rest of the quarterbacks with COVID last year. And if I remember, he also missed some time in that training camp. And now he missed like the whole offseason in a baseball cap sitting on the sideline. So I don't know what the deal was with that or what any of the injuries were. The Vikings didn't have to disclose it, so we'll never know. But whatever. Hasn't been available, so it's a pretty obvious cut. But that puts the Vikings at 3 quarterbacks for camp. And that's unusual. Usually you'll bring in 4 quarterbacks for camp. You won't just bring in the 3. You'll bring in 4 and you'll cut 1 at the end or 2 at the end. But typically you want a first, second, third team quarterback, and then you want another guy. This is very often some undrafted whoever, some rookie tryout, some random guy that who cares about, that will like operate and take the snap on run and blocking drills. Or, kind of be the quarterback that those drills need a quarterback to operate, but you don't want to waste Kirk Cousins' time doing that. So you bring in Peter Pujols was one of them a few years ago, like one of those guys. That was what Nate Stanley has been. And so he never really got like a true shot to, that was what like Case Cookus was when he was in camp last year. And so he never really got like a true shot to get it. The funny thing about Nate Stanley, so after the COVID debacle last camp with, Case Cookus and all those guys, when Kellen Mond finally came back, if you remember, Kellen Mond actually got sick. None of the other ones, they were just exposed, so they just needed to like sit out the 4 or 5 days. Kellen Mond got genuinely sick and he couldn't come back for 10 whole days. And when he came back, they put him at the very end of the depth chart. His first day back, he was QB4 on the depth chart, which was not unusual for Mike Zimmer. He'd put rookies on the bottom and say, you want to be better than 4 string, beat out Nate Stanley. And it took Kellen Mond 1 day to beat out Nate Stanley. That is hilarious considering the context we know now that Kellen Mond had just lost 20 pounds in 10 days because of a bad case of COVID. And he was like very clearly not ready yet even before that. Like we knew that going into the draft. And it took him 1 day to beat out Nate Stanley. And then he couldn't beat Sean Mannion for the QB2 job. But the next day he came out and Kellen Mond was QB3, and that's where he stayed for the whole season. I don't know. That should tell you what you need to know about how good Nate Stanley was. So all of that and not really being available, pretty easy cut. But who's going to be that 4th quarterback? Will they have one? You could just like have a coach do it, right? Shoot, you could find a fan, pay him $20 an hour, and they'll probably go do that, right? It's not a hard job to fill. It's certainly not a priority thing. And if you're freeing up a roster spot and you want to say grab an Ndamukong Suh or somebody like that, Sheldon Richardson, maybe that would obviously be preferable than some QB4 and camp arm type guy. Also, if you do need a camp arm that bad, you could probably shed some random undrafted rookie linebacker and kind of call it a day. So all of that is to say, this sure points to some kind of signing. July 19th was a cut, is not a day you often see a guy get randomly cut. It seems like they intend to bring someone in, and they already know that it's going to be Nate Stanley, and it's kind of do the player a solid. As soon as you've decided to cut the guy, don't just string him along. Do him a solid and, let him start looking for his next opportunity. It's also certainly not unheard of to enter camp with 89 players, and it's just that many more reps you can give to Kellen Mond or whatever, and not worry about it. So what happens now, right? It could be in Ndamukong Suh. We talked about that a few weeks ago. I wrote an article, did a whole thing on Ndamukong Suh. There's been a few questions in like mailbags about Anthony Barr. Chris Thomason just called Anthony Barr, talking to him about some charity event, and Anthony Barr hung up on him. Classic. That is, you reap what you sow. So Anthony Barr, I guess, not willing to talk to Thomason about it, but where he's at is still something of a mystery. I'm not sure if he has two functional legs. He had some sort of knee issue that came out last year, and teams know about it. So there's obviously not going to be a huge market for a guy like that, even though he's still got some play in him. He was playing fine down the stretch last year, but obviously the availability is going to be a huge concern for anybody. But hey, sure, bring him in for a vet minimum or something, then I guess, you can talk me into pretty much anybody with that. Could be somebody like Sheldon Richardson. A ton of people still are very obsessed with JC Treader. I don't know if he has two working legs either. There's been some talk about his knees being a problem, and maybe, again, that's a reason he hasn't signed anywhere. And again, I ask you, why do you know his name? How good is he actually? Or do you just know him from being the union president? I really do think that name recognition is going really far with JC Treader, and people who haven't watched a snap of him are really obsessed with him. If that's not you, that's okay. Then I'm not talking about you. If you've watched a bunch of JC Treader, went and watched a bunch of Browns tape, and you love him and you want him, that's perfectly valid. But just want you to check in on it. There was also a rumor about Kyle Rudolph potentially reuniting with Minnesota. He signs with the Bucs on Wednesday, so he's off the table. I kind of always thought that made a little more sense financially for them and schematically for them, and he just seemed like a really good fit there. So he goes to Tampa, and that's off the table. But another backup tight end that might signal that there was interest in Rudolph, that might signal that maybe they are looking for another tight end, competition for Johnny Munt, something like that. A lot of different directions you can go. I think the most likely one is they hire some tight end you've never heard of, or some random third string guard that's not going to make the team or something. I mean, it's player 90 on the roster, and the roster is pretty much constructed to be a complete thing, a complete idea, like as it is intended. You might not disagree. You might think, hey, they probably should get competition for Garrett Bradbury, but they obviously aren't going to, and their thoughts are finished. So they have a camp roster. That's just sort of some speculation on like where the roster's at in general. But there's also other things going on. What's up with the rookie contracts, and what's up with that stuff Ben Leber said on the radio earlier in the week. We'll get into it. But first, let me talk to you about the best tasting protein bar on the planet. Built Bar has once again done something that science should not have allowed them to do. They've taken their coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, which is by far the best flavor. Coconutty goodness, little brownie chunks. It's got multiple textures, multiple flavors, and it's all covered in 100% chocolate. And don't you think that this is some sugary treat for your cheat day. This is low calorie, low fat, low sugar, high protein, chock full of collagen protein, which your body absorbs better. They've taken that and they have combined it with their Built Puffs, their marshmallowy kind. So now take all that, but make it like fluffy and airy, and had a lovely little chew to it too. So go get coconut brownie chunk Built Puff before they are gone. They're going to sell out fast. If I know coconut brownie chunk and a new kind of it, they're going to be gone quick. So go to built.com right now, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off of your order. That's promo code LOCK15 at built.com. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the NFL Top 50 Players list we got going on Locked On NFL. BetOnline did their top 50 most influential players that they use to move the betting lines the most. It is vital information if you're going to gamble this season so that you know exactly who BetOnline is valuing the most, but it's also a top 50 list, and, y'all love those. So go check that out. For me, let me shift gears and start talking about rookie contracts. So this is also a mailbag question that I got that I've learned of a more complete answer to. So what's the deal with Andrew Booth and Ed Ingram? They have not signed their rookie contracts. Everybody else has signed, but they haven't. And in fact, a whole bunch of second and third rounders across the league haven't. What gives? So this is not the most abnormal thing. This is kind of does tend to happen, and it's happened before. The second and third round happen to be, and a little bit into the fourth, happen to be where there is the most wiggle room in terms of guaranteed money on rookie contracts. We usually take for granted, rookie contracts are pre-negotiated, and so it's all like a fixed amount. And for the most part, it is. For the cap hits and stuff, it is. But the actual guaranteed money on that, there actually is a little bit of wiggle room. If you remember, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, Nico Collins for Houston signed the max guarantees, and it held up all the other picks. So the Vikings in 2021, remember they drafted 4 people in the third round? None of them signed for like forever because Nico Collins got the guaranteed max, which means everybody that got drafted higher than Nico Collins also wanted the max guarantee. Also said, well, pick number 89 is going to get it, or whatever he was. Pick number 89 is going to get it, and I'm pick number 72. Well, if he gets it, I absolutely have to get it, and that's something that teams weren't used to giving out, and so there was some standoffs, and all of those situations had to get resolved. They're starting to get resolved now. The Packers just signed Christian Watson. He was also in this category. He was drafted above Andrew Booth. So his signing and the particulars of it won't have as much of an effect as somebody who's below Booth and or Ingram. But either way, the 2 second round picks are not signed. That's what's holding them up. And it's probably a matter of time. The deadline here is when camp starts. You don't want these guys playing not on a contract, or in some cases they won't play. And it's not like necessarily like a holdout in true terms. It's not I'm sitting at home till you get me a better contract, but it's like until we get this worked out, you might not be able to go in because you are literally not under contract with the team yet. They could play on like an insurance waiver. I think they've all of the rookies, I think, did that for the offseason program. None of them had signed yet. So that's not all that crazy, but really the punish here is not Ed Ingram or Andrew Booth never get signed and they actually never become Vikings. I don't know of a time that's happened since like the merger. Maybe the USFL did that, like since there was like alternate leagues to go to. So I don't think that's a possibility, but it's do they miss some practice? And that can really screw it up, especially for rookies. But hey, Andrew Booth dealing with a medical thing might have been missing practice anyways. And he missed most of OTAs, if I remember. So yeah, that's all stuff that needs to get worked out. What we're quibbling over here, though, is pretty small potatoes in terms of the cap. But in terms of, a kid coming out of college, could be $50,000. Like you probably would play hardball too if it was for $50,000. So to a team that's nothing, to a player that's everything. And so, yeah, that will hold things up. But this is sort of a thing every year with the second-ish, third-round-ish picks, and they always get it done in time. I can't remember the last time a rookie actually truly held out. What, Roquan Smith, maybe? And that was several years ago. This is not a thing that happens very often, and I don't think it's a scenario you have to worry too hard about. But if you were curious as to what the holdup actually was, Will Ragatz put down an article at SI that was really good, sort of compiling all the information we have and putting forth that theory, which I think makes some sense. So that is the story about that. And then there's the other thing that's been making the rounds all week, and I was dying not to comment on it, but it's become such a big thing, I guess I have to. Ben Leber went on the radio and said that Mike Zimmer hated Kirk Cousins, which like we already knew, but it's also, I just kind of want to talk about how we consume quotes like this and try to have a little heart-to-heart about that. So that is next. So Ben Leber I believe it was on K-Fan or on some sports show, is talking about whether or not Kirk Cousins takes a step forward in 2022. That's their subject of conversation. And he's kind of giving the refrain we've heard a lot, right? Which is, well, Mike Zimmer held him back and Kevin O'Connell won't. Therefore, yeah, we can expect him to take a step forward. That is the thesis that so many articles, so many people have put forth this offseason. And in it, he says, well, I'm not breaking any news here, but Mike Zimmer hated Kirk Cousins. And that basically every clickbait outlet in the entire world, you've probably seen it, now gets to write ex-Vikings linebacker says Mike Zimmer hates Kirk Cousins, which a lot of places have done that. And that's obviously a very insidious way to put it. That's clearly dishonest you're evoking the image of Anthony Barr said that or something, ex-Viking linebacker talks as if he's got some insider info. Ben Leber isn't even saying that he has source. He is not even positing that he knows this because of some insider information. Sure, he does the Viking radio thing and he's closer to the team than I am, but he's not if he's actually reporting something new, then say, I'm reporting this, don't just imply. And that always bugs me when it's these little tiny implications. And it's well, say it or friggin' don't. That's not what Ben Lieber's doing, though. This is just an opinion section on an opinion radio show where he's going, yeah, we all kind of knew already that Mike Zimmer didn't like Kirk Cousins. That came out 10 seconds after Zimmer was fired. Chad Graff did his big athletic piece about how they didn't talk anymore and stuff. So we've known that for a while, but every clickbait outlet gets to have a fun headline. That's kind of all that is. But it makes me want to have a larger conversation about how to avoid that kind of thing as we get into camp, as we get into a new regime. At first glance, this regime seems a little leakier than the last one. That might just be a new thing, but we might get a little more information. They were pretty tight-lipped last year, especially around injuries and around, we never got to know anything about any Danielle Hunter stuff. Part of that's Hunter's camp too, but either way, when you're seeing information and how to avoid the pitfalls of thinking that some ex-Viking was talking crap about his team after leaving or something. No, the ex-Viking is Ben Leber. He's been in the radio for a decade. He's got as much pull as, Paul Charchian. He's a K-Fan guy. And he didn't even think, he wasn't even trying to say that this was some report that he had on his sources. This is basically public knowledge by now. So when you see stuff like that, for one, if you see something vague that seems purposely vague, ex-Viking linebacker, that should set off an alarm bell to you. If you see that headline, either click on it and see who the ex-Viking was, right? Because if it says ex-Viking linebacker and it's Ben Leber, or, it says, Minnesotan NFL player's father says, well, that could be Larry Fitzgerald Sr., who just says everything. If what you think is happening is, if the headline doesn't say that, it says some vague version of what you think is happening, you gotta check it and either check the article, or sometimes what I'll do when I see a headline like that and I don't even know if I want to click on the article is I'll Google that name and see what other publications are saying about it, or if there's anything. And if there's nothing, then I'll click it and see if they have something unique, and a lot of the time they don't. But I think, I don't know, we all just as a beyond football too, just as a community, all right, as a group of people, we need to be better at taking in information on the internet and understanding what is trustworthy and what isn't. And what is trustworthy in terms of sports, you're not going to see a lot of just straight up blatant lies from a publication. There is no sports Breitbart that I know of, or I don't know if you're on what's Salon. I don't know what the left version of Breitbart is, but that doesn't exist for sports as much. There are clickbaity outlets. There are, blogs that like to be a little misleading with their headlines, but they won't just outright lie to you. So that's something. But what I like to ask a little more often is, what did they say on purpose and what did they imply on accident? And I only really trust what somebody is willing to say with their whole chest on purpose and be extra clear about, That's why, I love Chad Graff at The Athletic. I've had him on the show, and I think his reporting is really, and everybody at The Athletic's great. But, when Chad wrote his piece about Zimmer's firing, there was a lot of really cracked reporting in it. And it was very concise and clear. This happened. This is a thing that happened. And it wasn't vague. There weren't little, there was frustrations mounting in the, like, what does that mean? Who was frustrated at what? What was very clear and concise. And everything that Chad Graff put in that article was put in there on purpose. To me, that's something that I can take and run with and say, okay, this is now my reference for how things were at the end of the Mike Zimmer tenure. And essentially, if I have any questions about it, I'm going to that and I'm seeing if that article answers it. And I have revisited that article a whole bunch over this offseason for mailbag questions or whatever. But when you see something like ex-Viking linebacker says Zimmer hated Cousins, that doesn't give me anything, because that doesn't say on purpose that there is a player that was privy to Zimmer hating Cousins that is now out, airing the dirty laundry. That says Ben Leber said something on the radio and it's dressed up to look like something else, and that makes me kind of want to throw the whole report away. The other thing that I think we got to be very, very careful of, and I preach this all the time, and I will say this every month until people get it through their heads, there is a huge difference between opining and reporting. There are people who typically report things. Darren Wolfson does this a lot. He'll go on Twitter and he'll share opinions because he's a person just sharing his sports opinions, his guesses for what's going to happen. And he does do those off of a platform of more information than a layperson like you or I have. Wolfson has sources and he has insider info and stuff. But when Darren Wolfson has a report, when he has something to share, he will be abundantly clear that this is information that I am imparting to the public. He'll say, source tells me, is I am reporting. There is language that means here I'm giving you information that wasn't out before. Or he'll answer a question. A lot of times people will answer. That's how his reports comes out. They'll ask a question. Hey, are the Vikings into Barr? And he'll say something like, haven't heard anything. And you get a million clickbait outlets going, Vikings haven't reached out to Barr. And he's like, no, I just didn't hear anything. Or he'll say something like, somebody said that they had like one conversation, but it's not really a huge deal. And I don't really think they're going to do it, but who's to say? And then you get a bunch of clickbait outlets saying, Vikings reporter says Vikings won't go after Anthony Barr, that kind of thing. But that's not what he said. He just said, I don't really know. And if I had to guess based on my information, his speculation is now in there. And he's always really clear about that. Like, it is not hard to tell whether or not Darren Wolfson is like reporting or opining. But you got to pay attention to which it is, and don't take an opinion and accidentally run with it as a report. That's something that I know he hates when people do that, and that with good reason, right? Because it makes him look like he reported stuff that's not true. And it's either that or he just like can't share his opinions with people that listen to him, which I know he enjoys, and I wouldn't want to deprive him of that. That's what we have to do. The other one is Paul Allen. Oh my God, Paul Allen will come and just do like, I don't know. I don't think they're going to draft a linebacker. Like, he'll just say stuff like that. Like, I don't think they're drafting a wide receiver. And people will run with it like that's news. And like, yeah, Paul Allen's really plugged in, but he wasn't trying to make a prediction there. He wasn't trying to report anything. He wasn't trying to secretly give us information we didn't already have. He was just saying his opinion on the matter. It's just as validly as if I was like, I didn't think they were going to take a defensive end, like that means just as much. And he has a platform of more information, but when he says stuff like that, he's pretty deliberately not using it because it's an opinion segment on his opinion show, and he doesn't have to constantly be reporting to do his show. It's not the content he's doing. It's not the intent. And so understanding, I guess, the intent of what people say, especially as we get into camp, as we get through, what does Kwesi think of this? What does Kevin O'Connell think of this? We're going to go through another Kirk Cousins contract thing next offseason because he'll be in the last year of a contract and he won't want that. So we're going to have to answer that question. We're going to have to do this. So these are skills I want you to have. All right. And they extend beyond sports. If you're reading something about the news, about politics or science or whatever, look at what you're reading, determine how much you trust it just generally, right? And then determine what did they say intentionally and what did they want you to pick up on accidentally because it's a better headline. There's a big difference between those things. And as somebody who has worked for 11 years now in the clickbait industry. I mean, I have made more titles than I can count for this or otherwise. The goal is to make you accidentally think something. Don't fall for it if you don't want to think the wrong thing. The goal is to make you think that that something more interesting happened and make you click. Don't walk away still thinking that. Click if you're gonna, and if they got your click, then sure. But make sure that what you think is happening is actually happening. Don't let vagaries let your mind and imagination run wild. That is my advice to you from a seasoned clickbaiter. All right. So tomorrow on the show, I don't know, maybe we'll do some history stuff. Saturday, check out my Twitter. There's going to be a trailer for the history documentary that I've been talking about all week. I'm really excited to share that. I cannot wait till the first actual episode comes out. That'll be July 30th. It will be available in some form for you guys to watch. It won't be a YouTube link. It might be something else, but we'll get to that a little later. There's some things shaking out yet. But the history doc is very awesome and fun. I'm very, very excited about sharing it with you. And it's I hope you guys find as much meaning in it as I have. We'll talk more about it. Maybe we'll talk more about it tomorrow. I'll see y'all then. And as always, Skull.